Okay, other than the record videos, which I still need to work on, here is the recap of the 2018 PFA season. Unlike the last 2 years where I did by division, it would be 8 videos where I talk about each team in order based upon the division. I'm just going to talk about in general, like right here. This video is going to probably be a long one, but I really don't want to do 8 videos of talking about it. I just want to get done and over with so I can get the new setups for 2019 underway to catch up with the real life. So now let's get into the recap of the 2018 season. Some teams I'm going to talk about more in depth than others. So I will start off with the National East, of course, like in that order, as the worst team in the league was the Boston Destroyers, as you see. From last year, this year, they had a 3-game improvement, I believe it was. They finished 6-12, as they had up and down years. Some moments they looked really good, other moments they looked really, really, really bad. As Sterling Osborne, their starting quarterback, he's most likely going to be gone at the end of the year as their new rookie is going to probably take his place. And yeah, we'll see what happens for them next year. But the big team we got to talk about in the National East is the Manhattan Greens. Remember, they were the defending champs going into this year. And it looked like that maybe they could beat the odds of Omaha failed the year before and actually win it again or make it back to the playoffs. And they started off 0-4, and they never really recovered from that. They were 5-6, 7-8 at one point, but then after that, they lost their final remaining games and just never recovered. 7-11, another losing season. They are the first defending champs to have a losing record, and of course, they missed the playoffs. And they just lost way too many close games. They had 6 games where they lost that were within a score of winning it. Very disappointing results. And this stat right here is very fitting for how the team played. I mentioned this throughout the entire year, but did you know that in 8 of the 9 home games they had this year, it rained in? It rained in all but one of the Manhattan Greens home games this year. And that last game against Denver was cloudy and had a good chance of rain or snow. So, yeah, all their games could have had rain possibly. I find that so weird. Such a weird thing to happen, and also how fitting too for them to be such a bad team this year and for it to just rain in all of their home games. Crazy stat. What are they going to have to do next year? Don't know if there's really much they have to do next year. They just need to win games, not choke games, and maybe they can be right back in the playoff mix next year. And then we head up to the Philadelphia Hawks, and this team, I had some high expectations for them this year. I thought they were going to make the playoffs. And at first of the year, they were 5-2 and looking really good chance of making the playoffs. But then their starting quarterback, Leroy Black, was injured. His backup played like shit. Leroy Black did not play good when he came back. The defense shat the bed, as you could see. And the team just fell apart to finish 7-11, which I believe is their worst record in franchise history. So it's not looking good for Philadelphia after 3 years, and honestly, I think the Leroy Black era might be coming to an end soon because that was just a really bad year for Philadelphia. A strong start, but then they just fell off a cliff after that. But speaking of falling off a cliff, oh my goodness, the Washington Americans. Remember last year they had an even better defense than the previous year, and they missed the playoffs because their offense was so bad. They had 24 picks, I believe it was, from their 3 quarterbacks last year. Well, of course, Washington, remember, they made that trade, the big trade, to take Peter Rose from Oklahoma and to make him the starter. And unfortunately for him, he played not that good at all. This was his statistically worst year. But despite that, this season, he played so much better than anyone they had last year. So Washington, despite the shaky offense, they start off 9-2, and it looked like they were going to easily make into the playoffs. It looked like the only way they were going to miss the playoffs is if they had a giant choke to wrap up the year. Well, they did have that choke. They went on to lose 5 of their last 7 games, and they finished 11-7. Improvement from last year, but missed the playoffs, especially that last week of the year where they got absolutely destroyed 23-7 to the Louisville Saints. So yeah, they had a very, very bad finish to the year. That was a legendary choke job. Very disappointing that they did. So, another year of really good defense, yet still no playoff appearance when they almost had it. what is Washington going to do? Something's going to have to give, because this is not sustainable. They need to make the playoffs next year, and they need to go far, or that Peter Roche trade is not going to look good in hindsight. And then we finish off the National East by talking about the Cleveland Bulldogs. Man, remember last year? They were, I believe it was 7-0 and looked like they were going to make it all the way to the playoffs. And then they went 11-5 and missed the playoffs. Well, this year they start off strong again, but their offense, moments they did not look really good. But unlike last year when the injuries came in, they pulled through. They went 15-3, best record in the National Conference, and they got home field advantage with the league's #1 defense. And then they faced Tampa in their first playoff game, and they absolutely got embarrassed. What was it, 37-20? Dude, Tampa barely got into the playoffs. They honestly were not really that good of a team, and yet you somehow let them get the win easily and comfortably. Honestly, I don't see Cleveland probably being as good as this year as they are in 2019. That defense is good, but that offense, that has a lot of holes in it. And I could see them easily regressing. So maybe Manhattan or Washington or someone could take over for them. But I don't really see much future for them right now. They got a lot of work to do going into next year. So that wraps up the National East, then the National Central, as we start with the Louisville Saints. Remember this team 2 years ago was the worst team in the league and they had the #1 overall pick and they took Stanford Fink? Well, at the beginning of the year, it did not look good for them. I must say, God, they were like 2-6, I believe, at one point or something like that. They just were not really that good. But then they turned it around. They managed to be around 500 the majority of the year, and they actually got some pretty good wins, including that spanking against Washington the final week of the year that prevented them from making the playoffs. So they went 9-9 once again, but they were not as good as they were last year, as you see in terms of stats. But Stanford Fink, although he still hasn't played quite like the #1 overall pick he should have, he has made some progress. And with everyone else being within striking distance in that division, maybe next year the Louisville Saints can actually contend for a playoff spot. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. But although the team is unsure of what direction it's going to go in, hopefully for them they have some optimism to move forward on and to make more progress. Then it's the Milwaukee Lakers. Remember, last year they were the worst team in the league. They had the #1 overall pick, and who knows what was going to happen with them. But this year, they had a massive turnaround. They were in a playoff race for the majority of the year, but then they fell off at the end. But hey, they went 9-9. This was their first non-losing season in franchise history. And Herman McLendon, their quarterback, had a really good year. And Steve Vincent, remember, he was supposed to be the successor. He did not really play good this year, so it looks like Herman McLendon, for right now, at least saved his job. But will they make progress next year, and will they finally make the playoffs? We're going to have a close eye on them, just like we did with Louisville this last year. And then you look at the Denver Miners. Oh, boy. Oh, my God. Remember, last year they were contenders for the PFA Bowl, and they had a terrible season, but they still made the playoffs and won the division, but then they lost to San Antonio in the wild card round. I wasn't sure at all what to expect from this team this year, and at first they started okay, but then, oh my God, they had like a 6-game losing streak. They were 2-8 at one point, like one of the worst teams in the league. It looked like they were going to do a whole clean house after the year. But then, this team went on to win 7 in a row. That was crazy, 7 in a row. And they knocked out Manhattan and Oakland from the playoffs, for crying out loud. They ended up finishing 9-9 and avoiding a losing record. So, a nice strong finish to wrap up the year, but their offense is awful. And Zachary Ellis, who took over for their former first quarterback in 2016, he's not playing good. So, honestly, the Zachary Ellis era might be soon coming to an end in Denver, because a lot of shit needs to get right for them to get back in the playoff contention, because it's not looking good. And then the Omaha Thunder, the champs of 2 years ago, remember they had a strong start last year, but then they shat the bed and missed the playoffs? Well, this year they've struggled the entire year, like around 500 for the majority of the year. They managed to get another win record, 10-8 like they did last year, but just once again missed the playoffs. Just didn't look good for them. So, I really don't know what to say about them. They have the offensive players, they're just not getting the points like they did in 2016. If they want to make like another run at for a title, they're going to have to get something going this year, because it's not looking good for Omaha. It's not looking good for them. And then the division winner, the Indianapolis Express. At first they were like 500 at the beginning part of the year, but then they turned it around and they ended up going their best record ever, 14-4, and making the playoffs for the first time ever, win the division. So, but then in the playoffs they went up against the eventual champion San Antonio Longhorns, and they just couldn't keep up with them and lost it in a close one. So the team had one of the most explosive offenses in the league, and Rodney Sanders came in as one of the best quarterbacks in the league after being like middle of the road the first 2 years. He really took a big step, and that helped out massively. But the big problem for Indianapolis is the defense. Their defense, they have almost the exact amount of points scored as San Antonio, but look at that. They've allowed over 100 points more than them. That's not sustainable. If they want to make it to PFA Bowl 4, they have to fix that defense, or they're not going to go anywhere. And I honestly would not be surprised if they take a little bit of a step back, because honestly 14-4 is way better than I thought they would contend for. They managed to get there, but I don't know if they're going to be able to do that next year. But hopefully for them, they can do it. Alright, so now we're off to the National South, as it starts off with the Birmingham Hornets. Wow. This is stunning. The Birmingham Hornets, this team won a division the last 2 years. They were 15-3 last year. They had home field advantage, and then they choked in the playoffs against San Antonio. It was crazy. They still had a lot of high expectations going into this year. But after, I think they started 2-1, it just never recovered for them. They had severe injuries all over the place. They had like one of the worst injury bugs throughout the year. Their entire, like almost all of their stars on their defense were injured. It was crazy. And their offense, without that really good defense to help them, they just got shredded. And they went 5-13. What a disastrous season it was. Ollie Burke was injured for a good part of the year, so that first round pick they made did not look good under pressure, just saying. Maybe there's a good chance for them to recover if they keep all their players back in as long as they're healthy, but this was a disastrous year for Birmingham. Definitely a disastrous year for them. And that also goes for the Jacksonville Bucks, who were the reverse of last year. Remember last year where they had so many like really close high-scoring games and they were just winning them over and over again? Well, they reverted back to how they were in 2016. A terrible defense that they just could not stop letting people score more than they scored. Their really good offense got overshadowed once again by their terrible defense. It really came back to bite them even worse because they did worse this year than previous years. 5-13 again, just like Birmingham. It was just awful. And their star quarterback, Michael Witters, or whatever his name was, he was out for like a good chunk over half the year, so that isn't good. I got a funny feeling they might have to go find someone else in the draft to replace it, because you're a good quarterback, but you're not effective if you're benched for all the entire year due to an injury, so that's got to be fixed. But more importantly, the Bucks, they badly need to fix that defense. That defense has hindered them 3 years in a row. Last year, they overcame it with scoring just enough points in close games to win it. But this year, just like in 2016, it bit them hard. And I really don't know if Jacksonville's going to be able to fix it. They've had 3 years, and they still can't fix it. Speaking of a crappy defense, we didn't go to the Atlanta Trojans. And oh my goodness God. They start off 0-6, remember. They were 0-6 at one point. It looked like they really going to have like the number 1 overall pick and restart the rebuild, because that defense was so bad. Their offense was bad. But then the team, I believe, won like 3 in a row, and then they were really explosive. And after starting off 0-6, they went 8-4 the rest of the way and finished 8-10. A really nice turnaround, a really good point differential, but just wasn't enough to get into the playoffs. They had that 0-6 start, and they just were never able to recover by that point. So, Atlanta, they need to fix that defense, and they need to not have that bad of a start in 2019, or else they're not going to make any progress. And then we get to the Tampa Tropics. Wow, oh my goodness, what a season they had. With their rookie quarterback, Damon Jones, he was out for a good part of the year, but it didn't matter. They just could not stop winning really close games. Look at their point differential. They scored not even 30 points more than they allowed. But they just managed to just win games that we thought they were not going to win. And they had their first win season, and they made the playoffs for the first time ever. It was crazy. And then they beat an injury-riddled Phoenix Storm. Okay, that's not too much of a surprise. But then they went to Cleveland, the number one team in the conference, and they destroyed them 37-20. That elite offense they scored like twice, almost 3 times the points they normally allowed. And they just had no effort, and they made all the way to the conference championship where they faced their divisional rival San Antonio. That game, though, they just got shut out, 24-0. They just couldn't do anything about. But man, the future looks bright for Tampa. The question is, are they going to take a step back? Because that's not really a 12-6 team. They're just lucky. Or are they going to continue to make progress and be a contender next year? They almost made it to the PFA Bowl. One more game closer. Could they make it next time? And Damon Jones continues to improve from his rookie year and excels in his sophomore year. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But then, the San Antonio Longhorns. Remember last year, they were runner-ups in the PFA Bowl. Well, not the PFA Bowl, the Conference Championship. They lost to Manhattan, who had gone to win the title. They were determined to win it this year, and they were favored to do it. They had a slow start to the year, though. They were like around 500 for like a good part of the year, and looked like they were going to miss the playoffs. They were a good team. They just kept losing games that they shouldn't lose, and they were just blowing out everyone else. But after falling to 7-5, they recovered. They did not lose a single game for the rest of the year. Went 13-5 and just won the National South, which they couldn't do last time. But once again, they had to settle for a wild card berth. So they took care of business. They beat Hawaii in the wild card round. Then they beat San Antonio in a close, Indianapolis in a close game. Then they got the benefit of Tampa beating Cleveland, so now they had to host Tampa in the conference championship where they shut them out. So now they're in PFA Bowl free, their first time in the championship, and they were really bad in the first part of the game. They got destroyed, but they recovered. Their defense held strong and put up a lot of pressure, and Glenn Chen showed up when he needed to, and they won it 20-6 to clinch their first title. So, what can they do in order to make sure they don't repeat the trend of Omaha and Milwaukee and win it in 2019? I don't know. It's going to be tough, that's for sure. Jacksonville could be better. Birmingham could be better. Tampa could be better. Atlanta could be better. Like, everyone in that division could be better. They could have trouble maybe next year. But they got the quarterback. They got the running back. They got the wide receiver. They got a really good defense, which they did not have last year, and showed up when they needed to. Next year's going to be tough for them, but I'm sure San Antonio could have the best shot right now to break the history and repeat. Now we talk about the National West. Starting off with the Birmingham Dragons, of course. They have the #1 overall pick, because good for them, because, yeah, there's a lot of shit that needs to be fixed. Their offense is good, but it's inconsistent as hell, and they've had way too many close games where they could have won, but lost. And, of course, that defense, oh, God, it's like one of the worst defenses in the league. You see it allowed 500 points. That definitely is not good. So, for the #1 overall pick, I doubt they'll take a quarterback, since they already got Frederick Van Dyke. It's going to probably be either someone on the defense, or maybe another offensive weapon or something like that. I doubt it'll be a quarterback. So, Portland's got a lot of things to get fixed before they can get competitive again, because they've regressed each year so far in PFA. And then it's the Los Angeles Dragons, who had a nice turnaround year. They went 8-10. And you see, they had a winning record in their division. That's pretty impressive. They won half their games in the conference. Not bad. Their point differential isn't good, but it wasn't as bad as it was last year. So the team had a nice bounce-back year, but one major improvement they need is to replace Maurice Green, their quarterback. Oh my God, he threw 24 touchdowns, but 23 picks. That is not good. And remember, Justin Rowland, he played really good last year as his backup, and in the little bit of time he played, he did good this year too. So Justin Rowland might possibly become the starter next year. I guess we'll have to wait and see. The future maybe looks a little bit bright for Los Angeles, maybe. And then it's the Oakland Majors. As remember, they won the division last year, lost to Manhattan in the playoffs. I was thinking that they would contend for the division once again, And they actually had a winning record throughout the year. They looked really good. But, unfortunately for them, Phoenix and Hawaii out of nowhere rose up and they became a massive competitor for them. But, with 3 weeks remaining, they were 10-6. And if they won out, they would win the division. Everything looked like it was going to go their way. But no. They completely shat the bed the final 2 games of the year. They got outscored 58-6. They got their asses absolutely destroyed. It was awful. Awful how they played down the stretch. And Reuben Williams, the quarterback they traded away from San Francisco last year and gave up all those picks, he threw 19 touchdowns to 14 picks. So yeah, he is so far not been as worth it as he needs to be in order to have any success here. So I really don't know what to say about Oakland. Their defense is good, although it didn't play as good as last year. The offense needs some work done, but I'm not sure exactly which direction they're going to go next year. And then the Hawaii Phantoms, how about that? They were like not a good team last year at all. But then, oh my God, they started off 5-0 this year. That was crazy. But then they lost 3 in a row. They got their asses destroyed too in those games. But they managed to recover. They ended up going 11-7 and making the playoffs for the first time ever. The first time I believe a professional football team from Hawaii made the playoffs. And of course they lost to the San Antonio Longhorns in the wild card. As Richard Clough had a really good year. 28 touchdowns to just 13 picks. A nice bounce back from last year's disappointment. So now the question is, are Hawaii legit? Are they going to contend? Are they going to improve? Because you see their point differential, they weren't really that good. They got a lot of blowouts combined with some close wins. So, I mean, it's good they made the playoffs, but who knows for sure if this team is actually legit or not. And now we're going to talk about a really lucky team, and that's the Phoenix Storm. Man, they started off the year 5-1, and looked like they were going to run away. Well, not run away with the division, but at least make a playoff berth. But then they had a really bad injury bug during the year, including at one point where all 3 of their quarterbacks went out, so they had to bring in backups too. That was really bad, as James Cruz was out for a year, and Lewis Blythe, the backup they brought in, oh my God. He had a stretch where he would throw like 8 interceptions in like 2 or 3 games. He was so bad, but somehow, someway, the Phoenix Storm were so lucky that they just kept winning games that they honestly should have lost. The fact that they managed to pull out so many wins that they should have just lost is incredible. Because if they lost even one of these games, they wouldn't have been in the playoffs, let alone won the division. So they were so lucky after the struggles last year. But of course, once in the playoffs, they lost to Tampa in overtime. Not really surprised, as they were just spent. They were just too banged up and just couldn't do anything after all that injury set in. So, Phoenix has potential. But the problem is, they got to stop being injured all the damn time. If it weren't for the injuries, they might have won a bunch more games, and maybe they would have gotten first round bye. Maybe a challenge for home field advantage. I mean, they did play Cleveland twice this year. They maybe could have done it. But we'll never know. We'll see what happens next year. Although right now I would probably say Phoenix has the best shot to defend the division. So that is it for everyone in the National Conference. Now, let's talk about the Century Conference. Starting with the Century East. As the last place team is the Columbus Barons. Oh my God, I have no idea what happened to them. They had a strong start, well, not a strong start, but a good start to the year. They were 3-4, 2-1 at one point. It looked like, okay, they made some improvements last year, and they look like they're right in the mix to maybe contend for a playoff berth. But then after that 3-4 start, the team just completely fell apart. They just could not stop losing. They have the longest losing streak in the league right now. They lost all the remaining 11 games. That honestly might even be their worst losing record in franchise history. Because remember, they had lost a lot of games in a row in 2016. The losses just would not stop coming, as their defense was awful. And Albert Hendrick, their starting quarterback, he was just bad. Just bad. 14 touchdowns, 14 picks. Ugh. Just not good whatsoever. You can't blame the offensive line, unlike other teams. That offensive line protected them pretty solidly. So, yeah. That's a lot of problems. I'm pretty sure the Hendrick era is going to be over. He got lucky to keep his job in 2016, but now 2 years later, it looks like it's done. Maybe they'll go for a quarterback instead, since I doubt Portland will go for it, but we'll have to wait and see. Looks like Columbus has a lot of work to do to be back in contention, but how bad the Century East was, they could easily be right in the mix. And despite the fact that they had the higher seed, they were honestly the worser team in the conference. Well, not the conference, the division. That's the Buffalo Sabres. They had the same record as Columbus, but they had the tiebreaker, so that's how they managed to get the higher seed. And as you see their stats, they were worse. Their defense was just as bad as Columbus's, and they scored a lot less points, almost 100 points more. I mean, less than they got. But they had the better division record because everyone else was bad in that division. And they swept Columbus. Actually, no, they split, but you get what I'm saying. They had the better division. That's how they got the higher seed. But, God, that Columbus team was so bad. They're so bad. They honestly should have had the number 1 overall pick, but nope. They had to have the unfortunate benefit of Columbus being even worse, so they somehow got the division. I mean, last place. As Ricky Bale, their current starting quarterback, he had a solid season, but they drafted Michael Elliott in last year's draft, so he did not play good in the 2 starts he did, but he's the future. Now, of course, will he play good, though? That's a question, because this Buffalo team has a lot of work to do. They are honestly probably one of the worst teams in the National Conference. Maybe even the worst in the league, because their offense is dog shit, and their defense, just so bad. Then we head over to the Pittsburgh Blitz as, oh my goodness God, what an epic collapse from making it to PFA Bowl 2 the year before. This team started off bad. 0-5, couldn't stop losing really close games. They then won 3 of their next 4 to be okay, still right in the mix, but then they just fell apart. They went 5-13. This was their first ever losing season, the first time they ever missed the playoffs, and the team was just not good. Their offense, though, was really good. 9th in points allowed, 3rd in yards allowed. They had the number 1 run defense in the league, 8th in passing, so their defense was really good. Their main problem, though, was their offense. And it really, really came back to bite them hard. Gerald Putman, the quarterback they took in the first round last year, he did not play much better. 15 touchdowns, 14 picks. Ugh. And injury bugs, too. It just was a very disappointing year for Pittsburgh. And a wasted good defense. They could have easily maybe made the playoffs. They had so many games. 1, 2, company out. 3, 4, 5. They had 5 games where they had a chance to win. They've won them. They might have flipped around. Maybe they could have made the playoffs possibly still. So Pittsburgh, I think, has a pretty good potential to be right back in the mix in 2019. They just need to have a more competent offense. Kind of reminds me of Washington right now, basically. Then you get to the Baltimore Charm. Okay, this team, after having the very disappointing season they had last year, they had high expectations to make it back to the playoffs. They start off 3-0 and looked good, but then they just struggled the rest of the year. They just managed to remain around 500 for the rest of the year, and they were just inconsistent. They were up and down throughout the year. They had some good moments, like when they beat Cincinnati and Cleveland the final 2 weeks back to back, but other than that, not really good. They improved, got to 9-9. The offense was all over the place. The defense was all over the place. I'm not exactly sure what to say about Baltimore. I really don't know. The only benefit is, hey, they're in a really bad division, so maybe they could play good next year, make a playoff push, but I really don't know. A lot of it also is going to come down to our last team in that conference, and that's the Cincinnati Colts. Wow, I did not expect this team to go as far as they did. Remember last year they were 8-10, they had one of the best defenses in the league, but their offense was bad? Well, they flipped that around quite quickly. Started off 5-0, and other than the 3 games they lost, with 2 of them they got destroyed in, they were really good defensively. 6th in scoring, number 1 defense in yards allowed, number 1 passing yards, 5th in rushing yards. Really good. Now their problem though was their offense, as Walter Morgan he was not good this year. Well, actually, he was improvement. 13 touchdowns, 7 picks. This actually was his best season statistically. But he obviously is not the future for the team. And that's, of course, why they drafted Monte Riggs in the draft last year. He played 3 games, but he really didn't play that much better. As he probably will be starting next year, which will be crazy for Cincinnati to change quarterbacks after they made it all the way to the PFA Bowl, which is incredible. They had the best record their franchise history. That was the best record in Century Conference history too, beating the 14-3-1 from the Chicago 71ers last year. And then not only that, both their playoff games against El Paso and Dallas, they had to make comebacks in the fourth quarter. They were down by quite a bit going into the fourth quarter. They never led until the fourth quarter. Games that, honestly, they probably should have lost, they somehow won. That was crazy. But then when they got to PFA Bowl, their defense played really good at first, but after that, their defense just could not stop San Antonio's offense, and their offense in general just could not get anything going like the previous weeks. So, could Cincinnati repeat? One thing benefiting them is they're in the bad Century East, but since Minneapolis is on the rise, Dallas is on the rise, El Paso on the rise, I really don't think Cincinnati's going to have as good of a season next year. I don't even think they're going to get the buys. If they do win the division, they're going to have to probably settle in the wild card round. But hey, like I said, the benefit for Cincinnati is they're in a bad division. Baltimore, you don't know what they're going to do. Buffalo and Columbus are rebuilding. The only one that might contend with them is Pittsburgh if their offense gets fixed. So, who knows? But I don't think Cincinnati's going to do good next year. It's going to depend on how Monte Riggs does. So we'll have to wait and see. Now off to the Century Central. As, oh my God, I did not think this would happen. The Oklahoma Oilers, last place at 3-15. They not literally flipped the record, but they flipped a 1 around the record. They went 13-5 last year. Remember, had one of the league's best offenses, but then they lost to Pittsburgh in overtime. And then, of course, in the offseason, remember, they had Peter Rose and Wiley Chester. They had to get rid of one of them because they couldn't keep both. It was too much of a quarterback controversy. So they traded Peter Rose to Washington. Now, he didn't play good with Washington, but Wiley Chester with them did not really turn out that much better either, as this team went 0-3 to start the year, and they just were bad. Just bad. Defense was bad. Their offense was pretty good, actually, but most of the problem was their defense was just so bad. Third worst in points allowed. The worst, actually, fourth worst passing offense. Top 10 bottom in yards allowed. Their rushing offense, rush defense, though, was pretty good, but their defense just was not good. And then Wiley Chester, he had an inconsistent year. He put up 30 touchdowns, which is the best in his career, and almost 4,000 yards, but he also threw 18 picks. And that's not something you want to do when your defense is this bad. Maybe he has a chance to stay the starter, but I really don't know. Lavrin Okazko, or whatever his name was, we thought he would maybe contend for the starter, but he flamed out in his 4 starts, so that's the one benefit for him. But I really just don't know what to say about Oklahoma. That team is just surprising. They're inconsistent. Maybe they can contend once again if their defense is fixed, because I really just don't know what to say about Oklahoma. That was just such an incredible drop from the previous year. And then another team that was disappointed, the Detroit Engines. Remember last year where they had that incredible rookie year of Charles Cunningham? They went surprisingly 10-8, but just missed out on the playoffs. I had so much hype for them going the year that I gave them 5 primetime games, which I normally would not do for a team that didn't make the playoffs, but I thought they were deserving to get it. And just like the previous year, they started off strong. They were 7-2 and looked like easily going to be contending for a playoff berth. But then, oh my goodness, then the team fell apart. They went from 7-2 to 9-9. Oh my God. The funny thing is their team flipped more defensively, as their offense really did not play good all this year. And Charles Cunningham, He didn't even play all the games, but oh my God, his touchdowns were cut in half. He only threw 18 touchdowns this year. Last year he threw 36, and his completion percentage is still bad. Just 56% completion. Okay, the previous year that was okay because he was throwing so many touchdowns, but not this year. This is not really that good. So that's not good for the Detroit. What are they going to need to do next year to get back into the playoff mix? I'm not sure. I don't know what team we're going to be seeing next year. Is Cunningham going to play better, or are they going to keep regressing? Because this was just an epic collapse they had. They should have made the playoffs, but nope. They lost not all their remaining games, but 7 out of their 9 last games they lost. So that's not good for them. I guess 2019 will be a big year for Detroit. And then here's another disappointment. The Chicago 71ers. Remember last year? Back-to-back years where they won not only the Century Central, but got home field advantage. But then they had that very disappointing loss in the playoffs to Pittsburgh that was really bad. So they hope to get back into playoff contention this year and win the division. And for the majority of the year, they were in the mix. But the problem was their offense was so bad. That offense has gotten worse and worse and worse each year. In fact, it's one of the worst offenses in the league. They are 35th in points scored, the second worst yards gained, second worst rushing offense, fourth worst passing offense. That's really bad. Matthew Smart, the starting quarterback, last year, remember, he only played 13 games. He only played 8 this year, and he completed just not even 53% of his passes, 4 touchdowns to 3 picks. He was garbage. And his backup, Jeffrey Marlowe, was not that much better. Oh my God. Oh my God. And because of that, they went 11-7 and missed the playoffs for the first time ever. Oh, jeez. That is the main thing that Chicago needs to fix is they got to get a new quarterback. Matthew Smart, he was good the rookie year, but not anymore. The time's come. They can't deal with this anymore. They have to get a new quarterback and all that. So, who knows what Chicago's going to happen next year. They could be right back in the mix. They could be a playoff team right next year, but they need to get a quarterback, or else they're not going to get anywhere. They're going to miss the playoffs probably again like next year, just like Washington did. And then the Kansas City Hammerheads. This team, remember, last year, they had a really good start, but then they just bombed out to finish 8-10. I didn't really have much expectations for them, but just like Chicago, they were right there for... Actually, no, they had a really slow start here, but then they turned it around. They won 8 in a row and looked like, due to tiebreakers, like, oh boy, maybe Kansas City will be a playoff team this year finally. But no, they had 2 crucial losses near the end of the year, which they could not have, against teams with losing records too, I must add. And they just ended up finishing 11-7. The best record in franchise history, but still not enough to make the playoffs. Remember the first year that I thought they were going to... I think I predicted them to win the division because the Century Central was supposed to be so bad that they would run away with it. Nope, they ended up finishing 10-8. Then next year I thought I didn't know what to expect from them. They had a strong start, but had a losing record, and now this year they had a win record, their best season ever, but still didn't make the playoffs. But the one good thing, though, I can't take away from Kansas City, is Henry Settles, the number 1 overall pick in PFA's history, their quarterback, finally had his breakout year. 30 touchdowns, 9 picks, 1 rushing touchdown, 4,600 yards, 2/3 completion percentage. He finally played like the number 1 franchise quarterback that he needs to do. So now the question is, can they finally make the next step? They had their best season yet, but can they finally take the next step and make it into the playoffs? It won't be easy. Maybe they'll have a chance next year, hopefully, but that conference is going to be tough. They honestly probably need to outright win the division, which is not going to be easy because their division winner, the Minneapolis Kitsune, as this year, the team flipped. The last 2 years they had one of the best offenses in the league, but their defense was, they had one of the best defenses in the league, and their offense was bad. Well, that changed this year as Michael Fields had a really good, strong season. As the Minneapolis Kitsune had a really good offense. They were one of the best teams in the league. Looked like they were going to run away with the number 1 seed. As Fields put up almost 3,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, and just 6 picks. But then he suffered a broken hip halfway through the year almost, and he was gone for the year. Now, luckily for them, they managed to win games still despite his injury, but 2 weeks left, they just couldn't recover as they lost their final 2 games. They went 14-4, had the bye, made the playoffs for the first time ever, but of course, without Fields, they just couldn't get it as Dallas beat them. I think it was like 13-9. I know for a fact if Michael Fields was playing that game, they would have won it, and maybe they would have gone all the way to PFA Bowl since Cincinnati wasn't really that much better. So it was a pretty good team, but the injuries just really bit them at a bad time right there. As their offense is weird. 6th in scoring, they're 22nd points, 31 in rushing yards allowed, 9th in passing yards. A lot of that's because Michael Fields went down. Defense, though, their defense took a step back. 17th in points, 23rd in yards, 28th in rushing yards, 21st in passing yards. They have defensive playmakers, so they gotta play better. If the Kitsune want to make PFA Bowl next year and actually be a legit team, that offense can't just be good. That defense has to also improve too. I hope it's not the case that the team, now all of a sudden getting a really good offense, has to have a defense that's going to hold them back now. So, Minneapolis Kitsune, a really good team, contender for a playoff berth next year, maybe a team to beat to make it to PFA Bowl 4, but we'll see. They just need Michael Fields to be back, and he has to play as good as he did this year, next year too. And then we get to, I believe, the second worst team in the league, and that is the Houston Twisters, as they just don't get better each year. And they had one of the worst, this is honestly like one of the most lopsided team in terms of performance. They had one of the worst offenses in the league, possibly one of the worst offenses in professional football, well, not professional football history, but the worst offenses in decades. They literally scored less than 10 points a game. But despite their offense being one of the worst in the league, their defense was not that bad. 14th in points allowed, 13th in yards allowed. Their rush defense was bad, 30th in yards allowed. 9th best passing off defense. So yeah, this team has a defense that could actually be a good challenge for a bunch of teams. In fact, I'm looking at the list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 of their games they could have won still. Win them, and you have a winning record and possibly a playoff berth. So, yeah, this team has not that far really to change it around. They've had so many close-scoring games, 10-0, really weird score, 1-6, 5, 7-3. They could possibly turn it around and have a high pick. And since a lot of teams up front might not go for a quarterback right off the bat, maybe they'll go for one because they need one. Anton Giles, back up the last 2 years, he shat the bed for most of the year he played. Stephen Hargrove, the main starter, he was awful. He didn't even throw a touchdown this year. That's how bad he was. That's pretty bad. They need to focus solely on offense probably in the draft this year. But if they get the pieces right, they could easily contend for a playoff spot next year. It's just they got a lot of work to go their way. So we'll see what happens with Houston next year. Then it's the New Orleans Jazz, as they had a really bad year last year. This year, though, is weird. They were competitive still for a large part of the year. Still hanging there, mostly because they're really, really good defense, but their offense was bad. Just like Houston, but just a little bit more competent. As they just could not score games that they needed. And James Williams, their starting quarterback, he threw for just barely 2,000 yards, 10 touchdowns, 5 picks. That's really weird stats. He's throwing very little interceptions in his career, but he's throwing less touchdowns each season so far, so that's not really good. That needs to get better. And of course, they drafted Emil Lee in the draft this year, as he was a 4th rounder. he didn't really play much better either, so maybe he's not going to be contending yet. But James Williams needs to play better next year if he wants to maintain his job. But maybe they'll go for a running back instead, because Luke Star didn't even get 1,000 yards rushing, not even 800 in all 18 games. That's not good. So, yeah, New Orleans, they can contend too, like Houston. They probably could attend even sooner because their defense is better and their offense wasn't as bad. But yeah, they need to fix that offense to have any chance of making it back to the playoffs. Because remember, they won the division the first year, but they just never recovered after that loss to Baltimore. Then, oh boy, the Orlando Astros. They're the Atlanta Trojans of the Century Conference. Very good offense, but an absolutely god-awful defense. As the year, they started off 3-2, but then they went on to lose 5 in a row. And after that, they went on to win 6 of their last 8 games, but by then it was too late. As their stats, they were 9-9, their first ever non-losing season. Statistically, they actually had a near 100-point differential, so that's really good. Second in the league in offense, points, third in yards, third in rushing yards, 8th in pass yards, so their offense is one of the more elite ones, but their defense. Actually, you know what's the funny thing about their defense is they didn't allow a lot of yards. 11th in yards allowed, 11th in rushing yards, 15th in passing yards, so their defense was actually good. This team should have easily made the playoffs, but the reason they did is because two things. One, they were 29th in points allowed, so they didn't allow a lot of yards, but they sure did a lot of points. But the main reason, honestly, probably for that, is Milton Hester, their starting quarterback the last 3 years. He threw 28 touchdowns, but 31 picks. That's Jameis Winston level numbers. He couldn't stop turning over the ball. And I'm sure that cost him a lot of games too, which isn't good. And of course, he got injured a good part of the year, so Dwayne Howell had to play a bunch of games. He threw a lot of interceptions too. He threw a lot of touchdowns as well, so this seems to be like a whole team problem where they just can't stop throwing interceptions with the touchdowns. And this has been a problem for a team the last 3 years. I don't think Milton Hester's going to last as a starter this year, though, but I don't know if Dwayne Howell is going to be the future either. They might have to go get another quarterback instead. I don't think they would go for a rookie. I think they'll probably go for a veteran or something, because a rookie would require a rebuild. This looks like a team that could contend right now. They just needed a more competent offense, actually, because they have the offense to get a point. They just need to stop turning over. So Orlando's going to have an interesting year next year, that's for sure. Then the Miami Sharks, as they had a struggle at the beginning of the year. They were not playing that well. They did manage to turn it around, though, and play pretty solidly, as they just managed to make the playoffs once again, but this time as a wild card team again, where they got their asses kicked by El Paso in the revenge game from the previous Monday night game in the month before. So I don't really know what to say about Miami. Only reason they didn't win the division because they lost to Dallas one of those years instead of splitting it or sweeping them like they usually did. There was just one of those years where they just couldn't get into the playoffs, because it was right there. Well, not in the playoffs to win the division. It was right there. They just couldn't seal it. And I'm not sure what to say about Miami. They didn't play as good last year as they didn't play as good this year as they did last year. But is that really a reason to be concerned? I don't know. Anthony McCormick had a good year. 33 touchdowns and 5 picks. And then he put up 6 rushing touchdowns. He was really good at running it. So 41 total touchdowns. Had his best season yet. I'm not sure what to say about Miami. They can be a playoff team and they can win the division. But I'm not sure if they're quite ready yet to get back into the mix to be a contending team like I thought they were going to be 2 years ago. Then, the Dallas Stars. Oh boy. The team that couldn't stop choking. Remember the last 2 years? They were 11-5. And they just missed the playoffs back-to-back years. Well, to start the year, it didn't look good for them. 1-2. Orlando beating them for God's sake again. And it looked like it was not going to be the year once again. But then, of course, the team, just like the previous years, they rebounded. They went 9-3, just like they were the previous years. But then, We are at the same record once again, 11-5, choked at home against Omaha, and they still not fully secured a playoff spot, let alone a division berth yet. But then they got a lucky break where Miami lost, setting up for them to beat Oklahoma on Monday night to clinch a playoff berth. They almost choked it. They let me down for most of the game before they managed to tie it up, and then they won it in overtime to clinch not only a playoff berth, but they won the division for the first time ever. 13-5, playoffs for the first time ever, the third seed. They beat Seattle once again, and then they went on to beat Minneapolis in a defensive struggle to make it to the conference championship for the first time ever. And then they almost beat Cincinnati. They just couldn't seal it right there. So Dallas finally looked good, and they finally made the playoffs. Now, of course, the question is, was this a fluke? Was this just lucky? Troy Hill has not really improved much so far from what he needs to be. Was this just a fluke year for Dallas and they just got lucky? Or maybe they finally broke through and maybe they'll contend for PFA Bowl 4 next year? I have no idea. I guess we're going to have to wait and see. And then we finally get to the last division in the league, the Century West, as it starts off with the San Diego Rays, who were last year's last place team. And defensively, oh my God, it was a night and day difference. Their defense was strong as hell this year. They had like 3 shutouts. They destroyed Boston 51-0 during the year. They destroyed Las Vegas. They shut out Tampa, remember? They had a lot of really high-strong games. But at the beginning of the part of the year, their offense was so bad. 20-6, 17-3 that win. Then they lost 23-7, 26, 23-5, 16-6, 14-0. Their offense is so bad. But they did turn around near the end part of the year to go 7-11, improvement of their, I believe it was 5-13 the previous year. Their offense is still not good. And Ronaldo Schneider, who missed a good part of the year, he did improve percentage-wise, but he just threw 6 touchdowns to 5 picks. That's still not really good for a first-round pick. Kendall Swanson, his backup, he played just okay. So, San Diego, I'm not really sure what to say about them. Are they going to improve next year? Is that offense going to improve? Because that defense played good. I have no idea. Then, the Las Vegas Gamblers. Oh, boy. The team that has disappointed the previous 2 years. They started off strong at 4-2. But, once again, just like the previous year, the injuries just would not stop with the team. Keith Belcher, once again, got the injury bug, and he missed a bunch of games. And then when he came back, he really was not his former self. 14 touchdowns to 5 picks. He got 3 rushing touchdowns out of it. That's pretty good, but I just don't know. I got a bad feeling Keith Belcher might be soon wearing out his welcome in Las Vegas, because statistically, this team was not that good, as you see. Defense was bad, offense was bad, but of course, the question is that because of the injuries, or is this really a reflection that the team is just heading backwards, because they've gotten worse and worse each year. So, boy, I got a bad feeling Las Vegas could easily be in the bottom of that division next year. And then speaking of underachievers, we're talking now about the San Francisco Union. As they've started off really good at the beginning of the year, as John Getz played really strong to start the year. San Francisco easily looked like a playoff team, but then they just fell off a cliff once again. And John Getz, after that really strong start, he just threw 24 touchdowns to 22 picks. He's throwing more picks each year. Oh my God, his QB rating was just barely 71, the worst in his career, as he's losing 10 points each year. Oh my God. Remember the quarterback controversy there was, like, when they made the trade away Ruben Williams to Oakland? Hey, is this going to be a bad addition? We keep him instead of John Getz? Well, so far it looks like right now neither quarterback is really good. I don't know if, unfortunately for San Francisco, they might be too high of a pick to get a quarterback. They might have to either keep Getz, hope he has a good year, or get someone either later to draft or a free agent. As the team, interestingly, puts up a lot of yards, puts okay amount of points up, but they just can't stop choking games. They just can't stop losing games. They keep disappointing after strong starts. Third year in a row, they had a strong start, but just finished flat. I got a funny feeling they're going to end up the way of Las Vegas, too, next year. That's not good for them. Then, the Seattle Quakes. Remember, they made the playoffs last year after an incredible turnaround year. They got so lucky just to sneak in. This year, they started off slow. They were 1-3, and honestly, they could have started 0-4. That would have really ruined their chances. But they turned it around. They won 5 in a row, and they just kept winning games that they needed, and they ended up improving record-wise to 12-6. Although statistically, they just were not as good as Jody Tucker. He did not play good this year. 22 touchdowns to 14 picks. Definitely did not play good this year. Massive regression. And they just managed to sneak into the playoffs as a wild card. But once again, losing this time to Dallas. I really don't know what to say about Seattle. Are they going to maintain this performance? Because if they're going to make the playoffs, not only do they need El Paso to start like choking, but they need Jody Tucker to play like he's rookie year, because this year was just not good. It was really disappointing. Well, on to the final team now, and that is the El Paso Mustangs. As, remember last year, they were 17 up going into the conference championship, looking like they were going to beat Pittsburgh and make it the PFA Bowl 2, but they choked it away, and they missed the title game. With that fuel to fill them up going into the year, they started off slow at first, at 4-2, but then they wanted to win like 8 in a row or something like that. They were 11-2. They looked like they were going to easily win the number 1 seed this time around, because they were looking better, honestly, than Dallas. They looked better than Cincinnati. They looked better in Minneapolis once the injuries for Michael Fields went in. But they just went on a losing streak near the end of the year. They went 2-3 the final weeks of the year, including that embarrassing blowout loss to Miami on Monday night. So they went 13-5 once again, played better, but this time it was going to have to be selling as a wild card team. They got their revenge on Miami though, but then they went to visit Cincinnati. They led for the entire part of the game until the last moments, and they lost in the divisional round, which they honestly should have won, but they just couldn't get. For this team, I don't think it was really much there's to improve. They played better. It's mostly come down to they just were losing games that they just could not lose. As James Fabinovidox had a really good year. Alan Davis had a really good year, although it sucked not having him near the end of the year. That could have probably been a deciding factor of them winning games that they needed. But yeah, the team played really good. It's just that they just lost games that they were just not supposed to lose. So, that finally, after an almost hour-long video, and a few weeks of talking about this, because I did it not in one go, over a few-week period, that is the recap of the 2018 PFA season. Not really, well, in depth like the last 2 years, but it's the last time I'm going to do it this format, and I kind of wanted to get it out of the way, and there wasn't really much to talk about since I wasn't as in-depth focused as I was the previous years. So I hope you all enjoy, and of course, still got to do the off-season stuff. I got to upload the records, which I still have to do, and I still need to upload the timeline video. But once that's all done, we'll be going on to 2019. So see you guys then.